We are.
We
We
are
are
ready to
welcomed
go.
back by our new host, YouTube, RTMP, whatever, something, something. Hopefully, when we look at this again, we'll
We'll
see
see what we
higher
think.
quality video, which means we can see this whole piece of paper and hopefully even read it.
I'm going to
So,
be reading a lot of it.
what I should do though is make sure that it's not upside down. So, I'm just going to do that right now while you
Hmm.
tell us what it is.
The document that I have open at the moment was made by my mother, and it's a story. A quick outline of her husband, my dad's family side of the family, and how they got here. Really, so there's a. I don't have pictures of this family the way I did of my mum's family. So there's a bit more talking about the older ones, especially in the 1800, the generation in the 1800s. How are we going with upside down?
Oh, we're back to front and
Is it
the
wrong?
right way around.
Is it okay?
It's yes, I
Good.
can read. So I can see on the left, we can see Gilbert. Ancestors can be traced back
Yeah.
to.
Oh, if you
But
can,
where would you like to start from,
I'm
Crystal?
starting actually in the middle. I'm starting here. Um,
Middle out compression.
yeah. Okay. The paragraph at the top relates to my grandmother, my father's mother, whose name was Edith Maud Abrahams before she became Grace. And Mum has noted there that she lived in Brisbane with her family and moved from Jane Street to Arthur Street to Brunswick Street in the Valley before moving to Sydney in 1907 when she was 16, and where her father became the ambulance superintendent at Newtown. He had previously been a cook at Gatton College in Queensland. Gatton College is the agricultural college. His son in law, Frederick John, my grandfather, was a member of the ambulance class, and that's how he met, how they met because of Granddad's interest in the ambulance. So that paragraph has been added on, but we'll get there. Going down, because we're going to work our way down to here, Edith Maud Abrahams, whom I spoke of up there. The family's been traced back to Württemberg in Europe. And Mum has noted here, because this was the knowledge at the time when she wrote this document, uh, Duke of Württemberg related to May of Teck, who was the wife of George V of England. There was a family story that a child had been born who belonged to the Duke of Württemberg. However, I was able some years ago to access a researcher in Germany who told me that the two children that Carolina, who is mentioned here, Carolina Fink had, were mentioned in the documents, but where the place for recording father was, there had been a name written, but it had been extremely scratched out and not readable. So there we go. And what we know that Carolina Fink married John Deuce. And again, family law at the time, when Mum wrote this, said it was a romantic story of illicit love. They came to Australia about the middle of the 19th century, already had two children when they arrived together, and then married. And my research, which was confirmed really by the researcher in Germany, was that Carolina Fink's mother, whom I'm sorry I don't have her name written down anywhere, I don't know what it is, had been married to John Deuce. He was a younger man, she was an older lady, and as was the way in those times, if you got widowed, you got married quite quickly. Then Carolina's mother died, and Carolina married the man who was her stepdad, if you like, and that's that. So I suppose it was not illicit love. I think it was just convenience as much as anything else. And they decided to migrate to Australia and proceeded to have a little cohort of children. Margaret, Polly, Mary, Anne, and Anna M. Anna Martha we'll meet later on. Oopsie doopsie. Now, following down from there, now going back up here. Sorry, William Grace. So we've got Abrahams, Finks, Deuce, not Finks, Deuce, Abrahams, and Graces. William Grace and is the first name mentioned on the Grace family tree, and he came from Exmouth in Devon. The ancestors were South Irish sea captains, smugglers very likely, Mum has put, many Graces in Kilkenny, Tipperary. See the coat of arms if you want to find out more apparently on that one. Now, William Grace had an offspring who's John M, and I don't know how far, I think that's only one generation. John M. Grace married Mary Searle, and John came from Exmouth in Devon, and there were many Graces buried in the Littleham Church in Devon if you fancy a trip to Devon. And his children included Frank, Eliza, Ellen and Polly, and some others that I believe I've got a list of, but it's a very hard list to read. It's in pencil and it's almost invisible. John had a son. One of his sons was George. George left England in 1884 on the Cusco for Australia 4 days after his wedding, and he'd married Henrietta Snell. Henrietta Snell's family came from Sidmouth in Devon in England as well. John Snell married Eliza Perry Taylor. John was a postman at the town crier at Sidmouth, which would be an exciting career to have, I should imagine. John and Eliza had, Henrietta was one of their children. Henrietta and George Grace left England in 1885 on the Duranda for Australia. So it's a bit of a cross there. I'm not quite sure, because here it's talking about going on the Cusco and there it was talking about the Duranda, and I can't reconcile that in my head yet. I haven't worked that one out. The Cusco arrived in Melbourne in August 84, and the Duranda arrived in, the Duranda arrived in Brisbane in June 85. So they must have got off in Melbourne and then hopped on the Duranda. Now I see it. George Grace and Henrietta Snell had quite a few children, one of whom was my grandfather, Frederick John Grace, my dad's father, and the others whom we'll meet later on. Going back to this side of the tree that Mum's drawn, we need to go from John Deuce, who was Carolina's husband, coming down to Morris Abrahams and Marianne or Miriam Solomon. Her name appeared in both forms. He was born in Baltimore, USA, and travelled to England, came to Australia in 1850 or 1860, and he was believed to be the first manufacturer of rubber stamps in Australia. Well, with the magic of the internet, I thought I could find this one out, can't I? Could you? Yes, well, they weren't. Well, they still might have been, but a family called a business called the Swift Brothers claimed to be the first rubber stamp makers in Australia. So, you can claim whatever you like, I guess, and put it on the internet, can't you?
Oh, yes, especially if people are researching you.
Yeah. Morris Abrahams is buried in the Jewish section of the Toowong Cemetery, and I think later on we may see his headstone. Now, his wife was Marianne Solomons. You can see the Jewish connection on here. Marianne Marianne or Miriam. She had smallpox when she was 18 and then emigrated. She met Morris on the boat coming to Australia. They married in Melbourne. She had come from Whitechapel in London. Now, Morris and Marianne had...
I think it says Miriam.
Miriam. Well, it's Marianne or Miriam, it says both.
Oh.
So, well, and being Jewish, that figures, because she would have been Miriam in the Jewish, her Jewish family, but Marianne too. Or it could have been incorrectly written as Marianne, because often the documents were written by somebody who was being told the names, be that as it may.
Well, this is something that has been written explicitly. I just couldn't see it, and now I can.
Now you can? There
yes.
You go. Yeah. Morris and Marianne had Henry Abrams. Henry Abrams married Anna Martha Douce. There's a bit of crossing out going on here. This is because Mum had been writing in ink, I think. And we'll meet Henry and Anna Martha later on. I have photos of them. There are two at least I have photos of. Henry was an ambulance officer, and he's the one who I mentioned earlier from up the top, who was running a course, and that's how his daughter met my granddad. And Henry was the 7th of 11 children, and that's what I think that I have a list of children who I think are all his brothers and sisters. There's quite a bundle of them. Right, now their daughter, Edith Maud Abrahams, married Frederick John Grace, who was the son of George and Henrietta, who'd come from Melbourne to Sydney on the Duranda. I did look up some boat dates at once. This is my writing here from a few years ago. The Cusco arrived 84 or 85. It's, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You can take your pick, actually. I don't recall looking those, what happened when I was looking those up. And then there's a little note put here that Edith Maud and Frederick John, who were my grandparents, had my father, Frederick George Charles Grace, and a wing of others, and you'll meet them all, we'll see them all later on. He was born in 1913, the 30th of May. Now, after that, none of that is applicable in this context, but I just don't want to fold the paper over. I'll just put my hand there. But coming down the left-hand side, Mum was trying to work to get her family and see how it fitted in till she met, Velma Margaret, met Dad, Frederick George Charles. And it goes back to the Gilberts, who had already done in our first episodes. The Gilbert ancestors can be traced back to Sir Humphrey Gilbert, who was 1537 to 1583. He was a half-brother of Sir Walter Raleigh. Humphrey was knighted by Elizabeth I for his services in Ireland. He discovered Newfoundland in 1583 and drowned in the same year. Must have been quite exciting finding Newfoundland and dropping off the planet.
Where is Newfoundland?
Up in the north, near in the cold area with ice. It's all. I think it's Newfoundland now part of Canada. We can follow that up later. Yeah. Right. William Herbert Gilbert, married Mary Jane Gilmore. Now, William Herbert Gilbert was the head of the School of Arts in Leicestershire, and his brother Sir Alfred sculpted the statue of Eros in Piccadilly Circus. But we know now it's not Eros. It's who was it supposed to be? Who was it really? I forgot. No. Yeah, it's just been called Eros, and everybody calls it that, even outside the family. Okay, so William Herbert is the father of Arthur Gilbert, and we saw quite a lot of Arthur Gilbert when going through through my mother's side of the family, and he's the one who married Harriet Keturah Nowlan, and they were the parents of my maternal grandmother, Laura May Gilbert, who married Matthew Frederick Wright, and then from there came my mother, Velma Margaret Wright, who married Frederick George Charles Grace. I think the mum's aim in doing this page was to just see how in the end. I'm going to fold this paper over now and put another one out.
Right. Well, while you do that, I will read that the Wikipedia entry for the statue in Piccadilly Circus is the Shaftesbury Memorial Fountain, and it has a depiction of Anteros, which is officially and popularly known as Eros, but Anteros is the god of requited love. Whereas Eros can be love which is unreturned. But so it's actually it's for requited and complete love. So it's a completed depiction
Mm-hmm.
of the entity. And what do we have here?
Here we have another one of Mum's family trees. They're not hard to read, but it just takes a little while to get your head around it and see if you recognise everybody. Here, by the way, is that list of names that I told you I have. It's written in pencil, and I haven't had time to sort them all out, but they're all people who are early 1800s. And there's a couple more on the back as well, and I do not recognise the writing, although I suspect it's my grandfather's dad's father. Okay, this family tree starts with George Grace, who married Henrietta Snell in 1884. They married in England, and he came out first and she followed. For what, we don't know, whatever reason, some family reason.
Don't touch the mic.
Don't touch the mic, you get into trouble.
No, the production team has to intervene silently
Sorry.
off camera and never be. Yes, anyway.
Right.
Where were we?
Anyway, George and Henrietta were fairly busy. They got stuck into things quite quickly. They had Henry in 1886, Frederick John, my grandfather, in 1889, Hetty in 1887, so she's out of order, but we'll forgive that, Evelyn, George, May, Searle, and Jack. Things that...
Searle.
Sorry?
It's S-I-R?
Searle.
It's not S-U-R-L, surely.
No, Searle was a family name. Remember, but there was somebody married a Searle back there, and that name got carried on. Now, I'll see what I can.
It sounds like curl.
I'll see what things I might know about any of these. George Henry married Miriam Abrahams. I never met either of those, but I know Freya, my sister, met Miriam. She had Ralph, Enid, and Neil. Enid died in 1937, and I think may have been not married. I don't think she was married. And Ralph was a fairly ordinary. I think he did something to do with money. He might have been an accountant or whatever. Neil was as silly as a two-bob watch, as far as I can remember all the stories that came. The only thing that...
So like accounting in space.
Neil was a very clever person and into science and whatever, and used to work with Harry Messel at the Sydney University. However, as I say, the story that I know about him, and I believe it's quite possibly true because I can find no record of when his mother died, when Miriam died. The family blurb was that actually Neil had buried her in the backyard and wouldn't tell anybody.
Good grief.
I have done a couple of times a little bit of digging.
But can't literal dig in the backyard.
Yes. Oh, and the other story that came there was when mum and dad...
Did you find
the other story, the family one that I happen to know about there, was when mum and dad went to visit Ralph and his wife, her name was Winnie. And they had just had a new house built, and attached to the new house was a swimming pool. And they made their son, they virtually made him go and put his togs on and have a swim in the cold to show mum and dad how a swimming pool worked. I thought my mother was going to die.
Were they not familiar with the concept?
Well, probably not. But just
what about how hypothermia works?
Well, that's right. Also... Poor kid. Oh, dear. Anyway, next child along was Frederick John, who married Edith Maud, and that's my grandma, so we'll follow them later. There was Hetty, who was called Etty or Henrietta, depending on who you were speaking to, I gather. And she was the one who married William Buchanan. And she died in, I don't know whether that's, William died in 1950, but that's that Buchanan's surname. That's how that one snuck into the family. Never seen or met anybody called Buchanan, but there you go, they might have heard about the family and run away. Now, there was Evelyn.
I wouldn't blame them.
Evelyn Mary was born in 1892, and she married Percy Taylor. And Dad used to talk about Percy. It was his Uncle Percy. His whole name was Ralph Percival. There you go. And they had some offspring there. I don't know that I met any of them. Dulcie.
Percival's a really awesome name. I don't know why. Like, if you get called Perry, that's pretty cool.
Percy he was called because he's Percival. And Joyce married another Percy. She married Percy Railton.
So
I
she
met.
was
I don't know.
jealous
I
of the
did meet
firsts.
Joyce. Joyce came and visited us once when I was living in Brisbane, and Mum and Dad were visiting, and Joyce came for a visit. Joyce Railton, and she and Dad had known each other from childhood. I don't know any of those. Barbara, Andrew, and a daughter. I think this is just a lot of that's just from chat. Moving right along. George, born in 1890.
Just a second. Go.
All right. Okay. George, born 1890, and in 1920 he married Rose Arthur. Mum had written Rosa with an A, but when I looked him up on the register, it was Rose Arthur. Next coming along, there's Violet Eliza Snell.
So just to clarify, Velma Grace did all of this from memory. My grandmother just.
Oh well, no, she and Dad's father used to get together and have little tete-a-tetes and write it all
so
down.
This is quite a. We're looking at the efforts of a long time.
Yeah, so we're talking about Frederick John's siblings. So he knew who his siblings were. He was pretty good on that. Okay, but up here now, put up. Oh, is Violet. So there was Violet Eliza Snell, who died as an infant, 1895 to 1896. The fact that she wasn't written on this one probably points to the fact that either Granddad didn't know about the baby, he would have been 1889, or I don't know. Now, there was Mary Snell, who married Les Voigt. I don't think Mum spelt that correctly. James Leslie Voigt. And there's his offspring mentioned. Gloria, who went and lived near Chinchilla. See, she left town. Right, next one coming along was Searle. Searle Towning, that was his full name. Searle Towning Grace. He married Cis Wisby, W-I-S-B-Y. Mary Ellen, her name was, Mary Ellen Wisby. So that Ellen keeps popping up. It's popped up on me. Then 1902.
It's on you. It's on you.
1902 was Jack, who was the baby of the family, and he wasn't exactly a black sheep. No, he wasn't a black sheep. He was a wild.
A black swan instead.
No, he was a wild one. Actually, he became an alcoholic, which was a bit sad. But
wow, this took a dark turn. Wait up.
He married Miriam Johnson, who was known as Myra, and she was the loveliest lady, and she lived to be 102. So, anyway, Uncle Jack had
But because she was dealing with, no, actually, never mind.
I don't think so. She had a nice family. Her children were Ailsa, Raymond, and Frederick Mervyn, who was known as Mervyn. But anyway, one year, I'd grown up and left home, I think. Mum and Dad were driving down to Sydney, and they stopped in Brisbane and picked up Uncle Jack so that they could take him down to Sydney to see his brother and the family down there. And Dad reckoned that it was, there's several ways to travel. One is you go from comfort stop to comfort stop because the women want to go to the comfort stop, or you go from petrol station.
I agree with this philosophy. I think
there's more. Or you can go from petrol station to petrol station because the car needs a comfort stop. Or you can go with Uncle Jack and you go from pub to pub. So because you need to be fueled.
This is
buy a beer.
Good grief you've gotten out of me this episode alone.
It's good fun, isn't it?
My goodness.
Oh dear. And 1980. Mum, now,
So here, but we're in we're in the 50s. Are we
early
back to the
1900s.
50s?
Early
Early. Whoa.
1900s.
Okay. Well, in that case, it's completely excusable.
Yep.
I mean, it's sort of more of a
Mm.
lifestyle.
Yep.
Just,
Then
it's
there
not a
was,
decision
I don't
for
know who
them.
these ones are.
It's just the lifestyle.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Uncle Jack wasn't the baby. Ellen came along after Ellen married Jim McPhee. And they had a daughter, Mary, who was a dentist and lived in Bathurst, and Neil, who was an electrician who lived in Brisbane. And then they had a son called Marmaduke, who died young. Probably, yeah, if he hadn't died young, I would have had.
Okay, I can't let that pass. They named their child Marmaduke.
Why not?
I mean, that's awesome, starters, but like, there's a story there.
Well, put it this way, he never got to grow up and resent it because he died young. So,
And another dark turn.
another
Anyway,
dark
moving
turn.
on.
Families do this. Okay, going over, we've done the middle one with Dulcie and the Railtons, and coming back across here to Henry, we did Henry. Now this is where I come in. Frederick John Grace married Edith Maud Abrahams, and they had Frederick George Charles, who's my father, and 5 others, and we'll meet them all a little bit later on.
I like they're in the tree as 5 others.
Yes. Well, she ran out of space.
Did she have like an appendixing system where
Well,
she could
I
sign
don't
a new
know.
piece of paper?
Anyway, Frederick George Charles married Velma Wright on the 3rd of January 1942. Actually, that's very interesting. Mum has written the date as month, day, year, the American fashion. Is that interesting?
Well, it must have been the style of the time. I'm guessing, but I mean, I
So,
guess so.
and then after that, we've got myself, Margaret Ellen, and my siblings. But we don't. I promise not to go any further than that, and not including people. I'm trying to not include people who are still alive, even though I patently am alive, and I know things.
Okay, we can all agree with that and
Yes,
start from
and we
there.
go back up to Hetty, who married William Buchanan, and they had a little bunch of kids. They had Ellen, married somebody called O'Hagan, William, who married Hazel someone, George Grace Buchanan, Jean, who married Leo Hill, Beryl, who married, wait for this one, Norman Muddle.
Have you ever read the start of like the Bible? Like not just the New Testament bit.
Anyway, William and Hazel had Arthur and Bill, who was a policeman. There you go. And another daughter. And Jean had Clarissa, George. Now, it looks like By the Love, Bythelove. I can't work that one out. And they had 2 children called Paul and Sonia.
Okay.
So there we go. And the only other little bit of chit chat I think that I know on here was coming down to Uncle Jack and Auntie Myra's children. Was that Mervyn married a lady called Elizabeth Jane Dunstan, and she kept family. Used to write and kept not so much kept the family together, but she was interested in talking with her relations, and she actually became a politician. And you can look her up on the internet if you want to.
Well, if you give me her name while you move your microphone, actually, I'm gonna have to come over and do that.
She was Elizabeth Grace. What's happened to my microphone?
Nothing.
Right. That's a good idea. Okay. I'm going to fold these ones up now and find another bit of excitement.
And while you do that, I am going to try to. Well, what's the name I'm looking
Elizabeth
up here?
Grace.
Elizabeth, and what parliamentary position did she hold?
Oh, she was in the Queensland Parliament, I think.
Queensland
I found her easily the other day when I.
Well, now that I'm not operating on the little computer that could, a Liberal Party member of the Australian
Yes.
something. Okay, well, we don't need to go any further.
No,
Really,
go
there's
no
some
further.
we want
But
to
she's there if you want to look her up.
expose everyone's politics.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit biased, I think, in some things when I read it out there before.
Oh, please go on with
You ready
what
now?
you now
Okay.
have. Yes.
Now this
yes,
is just
please.
Mum must have been talking with her father-in-law, with Dad's father, because when I put this together, Mum's notes on F.J. Grace's relations. So he
Okay.
had been talking about
Just
Aunt
fixing
Eliza
my
Perriam,
microphone at the same time.
and Nancy Perriam, who died in 1865, aged 98 years, had accompanied her sailor husband on board the warships, Crescent and Orion. She was the great-grandmother of Mr. W.J. Perriam, who obviously was somebody important. I don't know the name. Eliza and her captain husband had a daughter, Vi, who was a cousin to Frederick John. Oh, that's why she's included in the family. And she was born in 1883 and was still alive in 1954 when obviously Grandad was imparting this information. Next paragraph. There are many Graces and Searles buried in the Lutheran churchyard in Exmouth areas. The map shows Old Holy Trinity Chapel in Littleton Parish on Chapel Hill off Temple Road. So Grandad must have had a map that was worth looking at. Coming down further, Arthur Grace, he belonged to the Sun Lodge at Exmouth. He was a great friend of Mr. Gorfin, who wrote the foreword to the book Exmouth Milestones.
People have amazing names, don't they? They really do.
When this, the man who wrote Exmouth Milestones apparently was called Eric R. Dolderfield.
It's awesome too.
There's lots of awesomes. Arthur Grace had a daughter called Mary, so obviously Mum's just writing down, I think, as Granddad's chatting away. Aunt and Uncle Searle lived at number 9 Albion Street, Withycombe Parish, when George and Henrietta Grace left for Australia in the early 1880s. The Searles are both buried in Withycombe Church Cemetery. George's parents, John and Mary, nee Searle, are also buried there. Frederick John says his grandfather, John Grace, was married twice. And she's got him brackets there, Betty and Elizabeth. So the Betty would have been an Elizabeth as well. But other records show he married Mary Searle. So that needs to...
But he was a serial marrier. Is that...
Yeah. There would be no records that I can access in Australia. You'd have to go back to England to find that out. Frederick John's uncle and aunt, Frank and Elizabeth Grace, lived in Manchester Street, Littleton Parish, when George and Henrietta Grace left for Australia in the 1880s. George learned his trade of carpenter in his brother's workshop. George's birthday was 8th of November, 1860. Henry's...
Why should you put that in inverted commas instead of put carpentry? This trade of carpentry. Anyway.
No, yeah, I don't know. But that's obviously, that's the word
Also,
that Grandad
no
would have
Oxford
used. And Mum putting the inverted commas would indicate that her English, may have been a little bit different. Henrietta was...
No, she's written it correctly.
Yeah.
I'm just commenting. Anyway, I like it.
George's birthday was the 8th of November, 1860. Henrietta's was 15th of December, 1860. And the last little bit she's noted here was Mary Wilmot Grace was the daughter of Arthur Grace. Now, a very nervous girl. Fred met her in World War II, an only child, he thinks. So when he was in England, he met some people on the Grace side of the family.
Well, perhaps the nervousness had something to do with the war as well.
Oh, could have done, although,
Especially a young person who's just survived
I can't remember
bombings. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. I know that an explanation of why he thought why she was a nervous little thing. That anyway, but I can't remember any stories to do with that.
Disorders like me, I don't know.
You never know.
Knows?
Righto, so I'll move those ones aside.
Okay, well, this table. I like today's flowers are from the yellow wattle tree.
Those ones the birds love, those yellow ones.
I like them too. They taste like honeydew. Yum.
Yeah, this is a photocopy. This photo of this grave was taken in July 2018 by Anne and Robert Grace, my cousins, when they were doing some family history stuff. They're Morris's great grandchildren, as am I. Now, it's written in Hebrew.
Gosh, they are so religious they cannot even write the word, like the name of the Lord. May G hyphen
Oh
D
no,
have
I
mercy.
think that's just
Is
while I
that?
go down. It's because of what's not visible. Okay, the literal translation of the Hebrew text on Morris Abrams' grave was provided by Michael Briner, the historian at the Brisbane Synagogue, Margaret Street, Brisbane. Here lies, and that would be that bit.
I really like the
Rov,
Hebrew lettering at the top of the.
well, this is the translation. Rov Moses, son of Mordecai, and Rov can refer to him as being pious, respected, or simply a decent human being. It is used only before a man's name and is rather infrequently used nowadays. With Ashkenazi Jewish people, the Hebrew name given at birth does not need to tally with the English one, hence remember Miriam and Marianne. So, and this name is usually named after a deceased and respected relative. Now, it's may God, but obviously something's missing. Have mercy on his dust, that is mercy on his gravesite. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. And this was from Morris's grave in the Toowong Cemetery in Brisbane. He was born
So
in...
all of the discontinuity and the weirdness with the names is because of the Hebraic lettering system.
Yeah.
And no, I stand by my initial assessment, and I kind of disagree. May God have mercy on his dust. I think it's the from dust
No,
metaphor.
that's been done by a Hebrew scholar, dear. I think he would know what he's talking about.
Oh, I completely understand.
Anyway, the things to pick up off this piece of paper too were that Morris was born in Middlesex. He came to Melbourne, and he died in Brisbane.
Sorry, I really am that childish.
Okay, I'm going to move this one aside now.
I don't think I was really done. That was more humorous than I wanted.
Okay. Right, here are two very important persons. Here's...
Persons?
Yep. Here's...
Persons, peoples.
I just love, if for nothing else, for this relation, I just love his moustache. Why don't I flick him over and read this on the back? Mum's noted on here. Henry Abrahams, who married Anna Martha Deuce. There he is.
I really need to.
You wouldn't want to argue with him, I don't think, would you, Shel?
Not with that moustache.
No,
I mean,
exactly.
Most of the argument really would be about the moustache.
Anyway, here's his wife, this Anna Martha, who keeps popping up. And it's been written on the back, Grandma Annie Abrams, formerly Deuce, in her 50s. And I don't know whose writing that is, but I fancy it's grandfather's.
So a moustache, sure question.
Yeah. Now, you won't be able to see this, but if I hold my left arm out and put two arms, I would be touching that belonged to this lady.
Oh,
that's her cupboard. You right?
Yeah, but no, we can't see that on camera. We can't see that on camera too.
No, you can't. You can't see the cupboard, but I just love it. Just love it. And to know where it came from is really, really important too.
We have just a small problem. We're going to just turn the camera off for a moment. And I'll turn it back on. Okay, let me just reset that. Oh, good. Yay. Now I only have to flip it. Could you put some text down so I can see whether it's mirrored in the camera?
I'm pretty well run out of text, but there you go. I'll just
It's
put
fine.
that
We're
down. You
good.
just want to see something.
Perfection.
Okay. All right. I had a good look at Henry. What's his name? I forgot his name. Henry and Anna Martha. It's actually quite interesting. He does look fairly stern, and I can see my grandfather there. You know, that same sort of serious face, and she looks like a soft little pussycat, doesn't she? But
No, I mean, yes, but there's some mischief there.
But like many, yes, but like many women of her generation, she probably ruled with a bit of an iron fist. Now, just to go, I'll move those aside and put this lady out, because this is the same generation as the two you just looked at, but this is the other side of the family. To dear Joyce, this is written by my grandfather to Auntie Joyce, who's the one who's just turned 100. Wishing you a very happy Christmas 1964 and a healthy 1965 with love from Mum and Dad. So that was her Christmas present. And I've got the writing here. It's a bit hard to read because the printer was running out of ink. Dear Joyce.
Hang on, you mean the modern printer?
That
the printer
yes,
in
that one.
No.
That's all right. I didn't need to do any more. This is your grandmother, Grace, nee Henrietta Snell, okay, born at Sidmouth, Devon, England on December the 15th, 1860, married George Grace of Exmouth, Devon, England, at Exeter on July the 7th, 1884, and emigrated to Australia, settling at Brook Hill, Lutwich, Windsor.
So this is the person we
Brisbane.
can see in the photo?
Yes.
You need to clarify this.
I said that at the beginning.
Oh my gosh.
You
Tell me
missed.
the person's name. Oh well. Anyway, if you're following along with this at home, I hope you're taking notes. There'll be a test afterwards.
I told you who it was.
Episode 12.
I read it.
We're
It
going
was
to
the
check
first...
all of your knowledge from all previous episodes.
Now. It was the first thing that I read on here. She was nee Henrietta Snell, her grandmother Grace. And anyway, she settled at Brook Hill, Lutwich, Windsor in Brisbane in 1885. A family of 9 children was reared, plus 2 dying in infancy. The photo from which this is a copy was taken in Brisbane in 1900 and I think it says 1911 at the age of 50 years. So it was her 50th birthday photo. And he signed it as he always did. Grandfather made sure people knew it was just exactly him. Signed Frederick John, born December 1888, and I can't read that. It's 15 Hillcrest Avenue, Ashfield, which was where they lived. And again, if you put those 3 people, that same generation, side by side, can you see them all if I do that? Can you see them?
When you say side by side.
Oh well, then I had to keep them because if I did them side by side, it gets a bit long.
The person on the bottom to the left. Much better.
Better? Works?
Now,
okay.
Just hold them there a second. Don't do anything. There we go.
Right. I think I already said before, I can see my grandfather there. I can see my grandmother there, my nana, and her. I don't know anybody in the family who has features that pop out. Though I look at them and say, "Oh yes, she's got Anna Martha's mouth or nose or eyes or whatever." And there you go. I find that very nice. I won't move those pictures, but I'll just put on here that I've got a pile of print, which I'm not going to read for anybody for love nor money, but there's just some historical data and articles about Margaret Zerner, who was Anna Martha Abraham's sister. So this lady's sister. And she moved up to the Fassifern Valley in southeast Queensland and lived a long and productive life as a member of the community there. And this articles, she got a big article written in the local newspaper about her. And she told them a bit about her origins and her family in there. But as I said, it's about 5 pages here and I'm not reading all that. and I'm not reading all the newspaper things. However, I'll read the last paragraph here because it's fairly poignant. Service was ever Mr. and Mrs. Zerner's motto, and no one in need ever left their door empty-handed. Mrs. Zerner's skill in the sick room was well known, and while her health made it possible, that skill was always at the disposal of her neighbours when in need of it. And I have a feeling that Auntie Olive said to me that she actually, Mrs. Zerner, Margaret Zerner, was actually a fairly good midwife as well. There you go. And I think I'm done.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your patience, people following along at home.
Yes.
Because,
This has been...
just 1 second, please keep that there a minute. I want to see if I reset this transform, if I just go pop. Okay, well, just 1 second. Anyway, thank you very much. I think we should probably just go. I'm glad and see if we can actually see the text when viewing it online.
Yes.
Because if it's worked or not, this will be a fun thing to find out. Find out with us in episode 12.
Episode will be about my grandfather.
Great. Cool.